Welcome, my friends. This is Maniacal Incorporated, and today we make a long overdue return to Victoria 3 to see if we can find some of the Irish characters hiding in the game files. Until Voice of the People came out recently, I had a very easy job. The title was going to be Ruling Britain as the only Irishman in Vicky 3. However, he has now had a friend added. There's two of them. From a certain point of view, it can be difficult to define an Irish person at this point in time in history. Strictly speaking, there are 5 Irish characters in the game files. In reverse order, chronologically, we have Lord Kitchener, we have Oscar Wilde, and we have the Duke of Wellington. Kitchener was born in County Kerry, Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin, and Wellington was born in a stables, I think? If you know, you know. But they would all be associated with an Anglo-Irish identity. They are, in the game, they are culturally British, but they would be probably more accurately called Anglo-Irish. But there are then other Anglo-Irish characters in the game. Lord French, who was the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland during the 1916 Rising, and who people like Dan Breen tried to kill during the War of Independence. He's from an Anglo-Irish family, but was born in Kent, so do we define him as Irish? We have 2 definite Irish characters in the game. I should just say very quickly that Kitchener and French are military leaders. Oscar Wilde is a celebrity, so you can't really get him as an actual leader. You could make Kitchener, we'll say, a political leader, and Wellington is a political leader as well. But there are 2 Irish characters in the game, 2 culturally Irish characters. One of them has just been added with the Voice of the People DLC, William Smith O'Brien. An interesting choice. William Smith O'Brien supported Daniel O'Connell's Catholic Emancipation movement in the early 1800s. He was a Protestant, but supported Catholic emancipation, but did not support repeal of the Union. He was pro-Union. And he did not support Daniel O'Connell's attempts to repeal the Union until 1843, when O'Connell attempted to hold a monster rally at Clontarf, the site of Brian Brew's great victory. And indeed, William Smith O'Brien was actually a descendant of Brian Brew. His brother was the Baron Inchiquin, which is the title that the O'Briens, or the descendants of the O'Briens, were granted by the English and British monarchy. And there was a monster rally at Tara in which 1 million people are alleged to have attended, and the British government were not happy. And when there was another one planned for Clontarf, the government basically deployed the armed forces and said, we will fire on anyone that shows up. So Daniel O'Connell stood down, did not allow the meeting to go ahead, and was arrested along with his son and imprisoned for 12 months. Now, he was released after 3, but that caused quite a lot of anger, and William Smith O'Brien actually became a repealer. He began to support O'Connell's repeal movement, and actually eventually became even more extreme than O'Connell. O'Connell did not support violence, and people within the movement began to split off and move towards a realization that some kind of violent upheaval would be required, and these became known as the Young Irelanders and the Irish Confederation. And William Smith O'Brien followed in this direction, went to France with Thomas Francis Maher in an attempt to gain French support for a rising in Ireland. They came home with a lovely little flag. There it is, right there. Came home with that, and still using it today. We're happy out with it. And then, in 1848, William Smith O'Brien was one of the leaders of the failed 1848 rebellion. He was sentenced to death, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, but this was commuted to a life in exile in Tasmania, Van Diemen's Land, as it was at the time. Later on, he was allowed to leave as long as he did not return to Ireland, and eventually, in 1856 he was allowed to return to Ireland. He dies in I think it's 64, but basically his political career comes to an end in 1856. He refuses to join any other movement. He stays out of politics, and so in the game files, he is not available after 1856. So he's an agitator, William Smith O'Brien, he's an agitator that could pop up and agitate for the petty bourgeoisie. Because, of course, you can't agitate for Irish separatism, you can't agitate for Irish nationalism. And that's why you see, I suppose that's why you see him instead of somebody like Thomas Maher, because Maher can't agitate for a free and independent Ireland. And neither can William Smith O'Brien, but he was initially a Whig member of Parliament, and then, like I said, goes over to O'Connell's repeal movement, and then continues moving in a more extremist direction. So he is in the game, and maybe he might appear. I don't know. It's unlikely. The other figure that we have is Fergus O'Connor, and Fergus O'Connor is an actual political leader who could appear pretty much as the leader of the intelligentsia or the trade union movement, I think. But the actual movement that he's associated with is the intelligentsia. Fergus O'Connor is a supporter of Daniel O'Connell's repeal movement from the very start, but is more connected with the Chartist movement and really appears in the game as a leader of the Chartist movement, which is why he's associated with the intelligentsia and the trade union. The Chartists were a working class kind of movement in Britain that had a number of different reforms that they wanted to see introduced, and the main one I think that's applicable in this game is that they wanted to see male suffrage. So at this point in time, you basically had to own a certain amount of land to be entitled to vote, and you actually had to own even more land to take your seat in Parliament. And on a couple of occasions, or at least one, Fergus O'Connor was unable to display the required amount of land and actually lost his seat. And that was another thing that the Chartist movement wanted to be gotten rid of, is that there should be no property requirements for individuals to take their seats, and that whoever was elected should be basically allowed to return to Parliament. So Fergus O'Connor is heavily invested in this movement, he's heavily involved in this movement. The Chartist movement kind of rises and falls at various different times. He's supposed to be a brilliant author, but an egotist. And like I said, he's kind of more involved with this movement than he is, we'll say, with the repeal movement or what's happening in Ireland around the time of the famine. He's also involved in attempts to purchase large estates and have them split up and distributed to labourers. And he makes an attempt at this towards the end of the 1840s, which fails. His entire campaign is actually declared to be illegal at one stage, and from the late 1840s, very early 1850s on, his mental health begins to deteriorate. In 1852, he attacks 3 members of Parliament, and in the game files, this is the last year. 1852 is the last year in which Fergus O'Connor can appear. I think he passes away in 55, and 1852 actually is also the last year that the Duke of Wellington can appear. He is also a political leader. His career is pretty much over at this point in time as well. He was the Prime Minister who saw through Catholic emancipation, but he saw that through in 1829. He was Prime Minister for a short period of time, but if you want to bring Wellington back, that's something I might do in a later video. But for today, after that big long historical rant on the 2 Irish characters that we have, Fergus O'Connor and William Smith O'Brien, I'm going to start in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and I'm going to see if we can get those characters to appear. There's a chance, I think a better chance, that Fergus O'Connor will appear as the leader of the intelligentsia, so I'm going to try and bring the intelligentsia to power, try and bring through some intelligentist reforms, and see if we can get the Irish in charge of Britain. Okay then, so here we are. I am going to pause and unpause the game quickly because there's always this kind of restructuring of the parties at the start. So we have the Independent Agriculture Party, the Tories, the Peelites, and the Whig Party. We'll take a look at what our government looks like. It's just about functioning. And we actually have the petty bourgeoisie and the industrialists in power. I think we can leave the intelligentsia out for a while. So here's William Lamb. And I will pin him. Here is the petty bourgeoisie, who I think... Well, William Smith O'Brien might be appearing as an actual agitator, but hopefully William Lamb is going to think about retiring soon. And I'm not too sure where Wellesley might appear. So I think he could definitely appear in the armed forces and possibly the Tory party, but who would he be in the Tory party? I think we'll just leave it as is. So we'll keep an eye on those two, on William Lamb, and hope that he retires and makes room for Fergus O'Connor, and we will see if William Smith O'Brien will appear here in this other empty space at some stage. I'm not going to do a huge amount in terms of actual building of a British Empire. We'll go for nationalism. I won't do a huge lot in terms of building an actual British Empire. I'm probably just going to up the construction sectors and let things pan out. Now, one thing I will actually look at doing is securing the philosophy department. Any British building is university, occupancy greater than 90%. So it'll have philosophy department on. That's going to increase the number of labourers and clerks. So where are we? If I go to buildings and urban, I believe. And here are universities, so I'm going to switch them to secular academia, which is going to increase the amount of academics, and that's going to strengthen the intelligentsia. And that's going to do it for all of them, and we'll put them on philosophy department as well. We could go and fight a big opium war, but you know what? We're waiting for the Irish to show up. We've other things to attend to. We have secured funding for philosophy departments in all our institutions of higher learning. The University of East Anglia has chosen to focus this funding on advancing Hegelian dialectics. Oh, fantastic. Sounds great. The Hanoverian succession is completed. William of Hanover has died. I wonder who the new ruler is. A member of the Industrialists. So we have the Industrialists in power. I think we've gotten ever so slightly of an increase. So yeah, we might as well leave things as they are for the moment. You might be able to see that I have gone on a spate of pinning politicians. I checked the files again. And there's actually a number of different regions that William Smith O'Brien might become involved with. The rural folk, the intelligentsia, or the petty bourgeoisie. So that would be, the rural folk would be a bit awkward. And for Fergus O'Connor, he could appear as either a member of, if I'm correct, the intelligentsia or the trade unions. But the trade unions are marginalised at the moment, and he won't appear if they are marginalised. So it's a kind of a tough one, because I don't know where they're going to appear, or what factions they're going to appear as. So I could start increasing the clout of the intelligentsia, and all of a sudden one of them appears as a member of the rural folk, or something like that. So I'm not too sure what direction to actually go in at the moment. I might start trying to just broadly improve the lot of everyone and knock down the industrialists, because nobody's going to show up in the industrial faction. A newspaper called the Yorkshire Chronicle has printed a bigoted article about the Irish people living there. We can suppress the article, or we can let it be released. Suppress it, -5 authority. Ignore it, add -1 standard of living modifier for Irish to Yorkshire. And if we just take a quick look at what the Yorkshire Chronicle was complaining about, we can see here that in Yorkshire, the Irish population is 0.75%, 16,000 people. That's who they're writing bigoted articles about. And if we look at the Irish as a whole in Great Britain, turmoil 1%. Irish culture is discriminated. And we can see that the overwhelming majority of them are peasants. There are a number of aristocrats, however, and they are all Catholic. So I suppose, as we were talking about it there at the very start, you don't have a way of representing the Anglo-Irish Protestant ascendancy, which is what you would expect the aristocrats to be. You would have a handful of wealthy Roman Catholics at this stage, the likes of Daniel O'Connell, but there is a failure to represent, or there's, I won't say a failure, maybe an inability. How deep do you go with the simulation? How exactly do you represent the Anglo-Irish? This is a community that is Irish, in, we'll say air quotes, but not discriminated against within Britain. So how would you go and represent that? Oh, Ireland, always causing trouble. Why can't you just be straightforward and sensible? Why do you have to cause all these troubles when we try and do a historical representation of you? Now, they're still sitting in opposition at the moment. However, the intelligentsia would support the enactment of public schools. The clergy would not. And you know what? It might actually help up the trade unions a bit. So I think what we will do is try and enact public schools. Hell's bells, this thing is moving quickly. We have a threat of revolution over preserving religious schools. It's only going to reach 50. And we've just managed to push through public schools before the next round of the revolution. So that will possibly strengthen the trade unions and the intelligentsia at the expense of some of the Tory party members. We're just a couple of days out from an election, and the Independent Agriculture Party is going on a bit of a tour. We could give them plus 10% momentum, or we could take 10% momentum from them. So this is basically the rural party. I think we'll add 10 momentum. And the Tory party, I think, have increased their hold up to 60%. The Peelite Party is on 30, the Whigs are just on 8, and the Independent Agriculture Party on about 1.8. So let's see where that leaves us. The trade unions have grown by about 0.2% in terms of their clout. We could still leave the government as is. The Industrialists and the Tory party effectively would be on 77. The Industrialists on their own would be on 64. I really am going to have to do something to deal with the Industrialists, because they're going to become quite powerful. So I might actually have to start suppressing them, which is a bit awkward. What about you? Who do you support? Oh, damn you. Damn you and your big head. We're a few months out from another election. It's been a quiet couple of years as we wait to see if any of the Irish figures show up. I think I'm going to add some momentum to the Tory party just to knock it away from the Industrialists. And here we have new election results. The Tories have indeed gone up by about 5 or 6% over the last election. Peel on 25, and the Whigs and the Agricultural Party has gained a small bit as well. So I might very well change the government. So if we were to kick out the Peelites and bring in the intelligentsia, if we were to bring in the intelligentsia alongside the Tories, that would make things worse. That would make things much worse. So I would like to try and put the intelligentsia in power, but we're not seeing that, or the intelligentsia in power, but we are not seeing that, and we're not seeing a way to achieving that at the moment. At the moment, our citizenship is national supremacy. If we go for cultural exclusion, that will radicalize the Anglican Church. I think we're going to push just for racial segregation, which is supported by both the intelligentsia and the petty bourgeoisie. You see, again, until I know where William Smith O'Brien and Fergus O'Connor are actually going to end up, we're getting a lot of admirals dying. Not politicians, but lots of admirals. Until I know where they're going to end up, I don't know if there's a point in bolstering one specific faction over another, and then they end up joining the rural folk, and I've made the... Oh, what is this? William Smith O'Brien has appeared from nowhere. No pop-up, no nothing. He was just sitting, hiding in the background, waiting to jump out in 1844. And he is a member of the petty bourgeoisie. That is as good as it could possibly have gotten. And we're actually in a position, at the moment, if I am correct, he will stay as an agitator. But if I am correct, we are in a position we could grant him command. We could click on the learn more to bring up the Wikipedia page. I'd be interested to see that implemented in CK3, the way we could click on the Wikipedia page for Murica. We will grant him leadership of the petty bourgeoisie. And he puts on a hat and he puts on a monocle. We have a couple of pop-ups. A popular Scottish newsletter has released a statement by John Frost, one of the other agitators, endorsing several poets known for their sympathies to the rural folk. What I will actually do, first of all, is just check what has occurred over here. So if we look at the intelligentsia, there we go. The leader of the... You spend all day waiting for an Irishman and two of them show up at the same time. Lamb, the leader of the intelligentsia, has just died and Fergus O'Connor has become its new leader. So we can now go back to this pop-up, because I wanted to make sure that Fergus O'Connor had indeed taken over as the leader of the intelligentsia, because if he hadn't, would there still be a chance that he would pop up? No, I don't think Fergus O'Connor can show up for the rural folk. But we can start plotting the Irish takeover. What do we actually have here? The Idols of Scottish Culture stand behind the reform, so 7% enactment chance, or a 5% enactment chance, and an increase to the rural folk. I think we could, you know what, if we start supporting the rural folk, I think they could come on board with the intelligentsia. I think. Sure, we'll give a bit of an owl interest group pop attraction to the rural folk. So this is what our government looks like at the moment. We have the petty bourgeoisie and the industrialists, and we're on 51 in terms of government legitimacy. If we were to try and bring in the rural folk and kick out the Peelite Party and bring in the intelligentsia, no. So I was wrong. The rural folk will not work well with the Irish. Who will, says the man. So this is what the Whig Party will look like. Obviously, if we try and bring in the Tory Party, that's a no-go. But the Peelite Party will actually increase to 61. Now, Peel, of course, is effectively the leader of the government at the moment with 30%. So we'll confirm this change. Actually, is there much of a point? I think, have we just had an election? We must have just had an election. I can't remember. So I'm going to basically bring in the intelligentsia and confirm that change. I've replaced all of the pinned leaders that we've been looking at over here. I will try and keep an eye out, however, if there are any changes in the armed forces, or possibly in some sections of the wider Tory party, to see if the Duke of Wellington appears. So we have two rather interesting characters here. William Smith O'Brien, is an inspirational orator. So as the interest group leader, there's a 5% interest group political strength gain and a 10% interest group pop attraction. And he had +2 and +5 when he was an agitator, which is inactive. So he actually remains as an agitator, but his interest group leader position takes priority over that. Because he's direct, he gets increased popularity. And as the interest group leader, minus 5% political group strength. So I believe they actually effectively cancel each other out. And another 10% interest pop gain. If he was a commander, 100% aggressive maneuver chance. And then he is persistent, which gives him 20% character health. And increases the political strength of bureaucrats. That's as a ruler. But we actually get -1 opposition interest group approval. As the group leader. And of course he's a radical. As is Fergus O'Connor. So they have a number of different policies that we're going to try and push towards implementing. Protected speech, rights of assembly. Well, we'll go for protected speech, universal suffrage. And the eventual goal is probably going to be a presidential republic with one of the two of these in charge. But we'll have to overcome the power of the Peelite movement first of all. While attempting to implement racial segregation, the industrialists and the intelligentsia are split. We could favour the industrialists. We could promote the intelligentsia stance. +10 interest group political strength and 3 group approval. Now we've secured mutual funds, which would have helped us to bring in some measures that would have been required if the rural folk, if one of these guys ended up in the rural folk. What I'm going to go for now is technology. And it's going to take us a while. Oh, it's going to take us a while. We're going to push for central planning. It's going to take us a while. Central planning will allow us in government administration to move to telephone switchboards, which will increase dramatically the number of bureaucrats, decrease the number of clerks. Both of those are fairly well represented, however, in the parties that we are trying to bolster. So here we have, in the intelligentsia, we have a good chunk of bureaucrats. We have a lot of clerks. Labourers, strangely enough. Not many peasants are part of the intelligentsia. Isn't that interesting? So that was the intelligentsia and the petty bourgeoisie, shopkeepers, clerks again. And who else is fairly heavily represented here? Labourers, interestingly. And the machinists. So I am attempting to try and bolster positions, the academics as well. So I am actually creating a number of paper mills, which will hire machinists and labourers. And I'm also going to start expanding the government administration and the academies, the universities. A horrendous first draft of racial segregation has every faction clamouring to ram in their desired changes. John Frost has the lion's share of the demands. Frost is representing the trade unions, interestingly enough. And he's done a mighty job. We could support the trade unions, we could take the industrialist suggestions on board, or stay the course and clear up any errors. So basically, what we're seeing is the industrialists, as they are leading the government, they're the ones putting forward all the solutions, and everyone is giving out about them. +3 interest group approval to the intelligentsia, and 15 interest group pop attraction, and we get an increased chance of the bill passing. I pointed out there recently that we've had a number of individuals pass away from military command, retire and pass away, and you can see here that the England HQ There's a 0. It has no commander, so it's time to appoint a new commander. And Lewis McTavish is a member of the intelligentsia. We can see there that the intelligentsia is supported by clerks, bureaucrats, academics, and labourers, predominantly clerks. And if we appoint him, this is actually going to give a boost to the intelligentsia's clout. So he will be recruited to take command. Now, we actually have enough forces there that we could see about appointing another general. Nobody that we would like to appoint right now. Landed gentry or armed forces. Probably armed forces, because they are on 11.1. They do have a chunk of labourers, however. Whereas I think if we were to appoint a landed gentry, they wouldn't be taking from the intelligentsia. And if we take a look at the navy, we don't have anyone at the moment. We'll stick Ivar in there, because he's a member of the rural folk. And hoping that that will bring through no. So as a commander, sure, we'll put John Stewart in there. Put him doing something. And nope, I was hoping that that would actually bring through. We could force some retirements, but I won't go down that route just yet. So here on the politics screen, we can see that the industrialists have 25.7% clout. The Whig Party's clout has increased dramatically, and they're gaining now an extra 2% from Lewis McTavish, our Brigadier General. Do you know what? I think somebody is doing a great job. He's only been here like 5 minutes. I think somebody deserves a promotion. Small Victories is going to run up at some stage. I'm not too sure how long we have that for. And then appointed bureaucrats is bringing in more clout. So actually the clout of the intelligentsia under Fergus O'Connor is increasing dramatically. Not so with the petty bourgeoisie. So I think we know who's going to be taking over the presidential republic if we can push it through. The industrialist clout has been dropping. And a lot of that is actually coming from the leader. So if we were to get a poor leader to succeed Robert Peel, that would be fantastic. But you can see there the average wealth of the industrialist voters is 37. 18.8 for the intelligentsia and 16.5 for the petty bourgeoisie. So that's something that we need to work on. I have also been setting a number of arts academies to be built, because that is one of the only groups that... so who are the main groups that are in here? Oh, the clerks that are here, I believe, are mostly... or the academics are basically split between the petty bourgeoisie and the intelligentsia. So for capitalists, they're technically split between industrialists and the intelligentsia, but they tend to go industrialist. And we get bourgeois patronage. That could be a bad idea. And independent artists is where we want to go for. So realism in the arts is something else that we want to look at implementing at some stage. I believe that's over here. Realism is actually here. And you know what? It might actually... 14 months, it's a bit faster than 15 years. We're going to go for realism in the arts and try and push through those changes in the Arts Academy. I was not expecting that. Racial segregation has been passed. Universal suffrage, distribution of power. Every adult man is given an equal vote. This is what Fergus O'Connor would have supported as part of the Chartist movement, and we can see that it is supported by the intelligentsia, the petty bourgeoisie, and the trade unions. The problem is that it will radicalize the industrialists, one of the largest and most powerful factions in the country. They are still by about a percentage point in the lead in the government, and that is going to change shortly. I'm going to instead try and push through census suffrage, which the industrialists oppose. So they will go to -5. The landed gentry oppose it. But it is approved by both Fergus O'Connor and William Smith O'Brien. So census suffrage has gotten through the referral stage at the first attempt, and of course census suffrage gives all literate men a vote. So we'll be getting those arts academies and those universities fully staffed with members of the petty bourgeoisie and the intelligentsia. And speaking of literacy rates, that's a pretty damning indictment of the British education system in 19th century Ireland. Realism has been unlocked, and who will criticize us if, with a ballot box in one hand and a painter's smock in the other, we take power in Britain? This should allow us... Buildings, I'm completely lost. Urban. And we're going to come down to the arts academies and change them en masse to independent artists. This will decrease the number of aristocrats and increase the number of academics. So I'm going to implement that to start with. We could also go for realist art, which will increase paper consumption. So we are in a bit of trouble with paper consumption at the moment, and you might be able to see that I'm building paper mills and I'm building wood cutting areas through government construction. Census suffrage reform threatens the power held by many leading figures in Britain, some of whom are using the political connections they have to obstruct its passing. I think we'll suffer a setback because we've gotten through the referral and the drafting stage very quickly. We'll suffer a setback and make some people radical. And we now have an ability to go back to research. I should check, was there anything that we wanted immediately? What I'll do is I will go back for central planning, and I will check around to see is there anything else that might be of benefit to us. We're going to be putting our paper-making industry under a bit of pressure, but we do have an option to patronize realist art. Artists are moving away from abstract, fantastical art and towards realistic portrayals of a concrete subject matter. As patrons of this movement, there could be much to gain. So I'm going to go and we will go to London to our Arts Academy and change from traditional art to realist art. Paper consumption is going to increase by 30, however. And I haven't been looking much at the trade menu because as Britain, you don't need to. Look at all that money. But one of the things I am trying to do is actually bring down the price of transportation, and I'm building a lot of railroads, if I find some of them, because our railroads, as they should be, are government run, which gives us bureaucrats. We've achieved patronize realist art, we have achieved census suffrage, all the things that we've achieved. The realist movement, the Arts Academy of home counties, has become a major centre of the realist movement, producing some of the finest works of our generation. I should have built it in Dublin and named it after Hugh Lane. I should have built it in Dublin. So 15 Arts Academy building throughput, progress towards the camera, or political strength of the capitalists. The problem is that the capitalists, if I am correct, are split between the intelligentsia and the industrialists. So we wouldn't really be getting much of an actual benefit out of that. We'll go for the owl. We'll move on towards the camera. The petty bourgeoisie, under the leadership of William Smith O'Brien, has ushered in an era of liberal politics that promises a freer society where all citizens have a part in the political process. We could say that he is a fearless leader He gets 50 popularity. Freedom of trade is added to the journal. And the thought, the world, and the ideal. Charles Gordon Lennox. I think he's of the rural party. I will become radical. Or somebody will become a reformer. Smith O'Brien is a fearless visionary. We have a new party. We've been told that the Chartist Party has been formed, and it's basically just the Whigs. They've renamed themselves in honour of Fergus O'Connor's Chartist goals. So it's the intelligentsia and the petty bourgeoisie. The Chartists have now overtaken as the most cloutful of parties. We still would not be in a position to rule without the intelligentsia, or without the industrialists, I should say. Oh, she's hitting the booze. She's hitting the booze. It's all these Irish around her. It's driving her to drink. And here's something I forgot to do until just now. It's maybe a bit problematic having him as a royalist. I also didn't realise that Seaton was up to 70 years of age, but he's one of the starting generals. I have promoted him to Field Marshal alongside Field Marshal Lewis McTavish. I thought he was 63 years of age for a second. 47, has never seen a battle in his life, and he's a Field Marshal, so that is going to give... I forgot to do that. That's going to give a good old boost. Getting plus 20 from McTavish now, and a plus 20 from Seaton. Actually, we also have a Commodore. A petty bourgeoisie Commodore. We'll give him an old few megals. Keep him happy. So we got a pop-up there, or we got some option that we could have taken just before the election was held. The Tory party have dropped about 20% to 47. The Chartist party are on 39. I should remember to bring this up instead. So the recent electoral reforms that we've made have had a significant impact on them. The Peelite party has dropped to 8.9. So if we take a look at the government, we can see in terms of clout, our recent promotions of 2 field marshals have had a dramatic impact on the Chartist party. And the Peelite party is falling pretty heavily. And we could indeed. We are a legitimate government at the moment. However, if we were to remove the Peelite party, the government would be contested. But it would be Irish dominated. We have a 64% chance to enact a presidential republic. If we were to try and do so, however, we would face radicalisation from the Anglican Church and the landed gentry. The Anglicans have 11.1% clout, so I am actually going to begin suppressing them. I have already turned off the bolstering of the intelligentsia. So we will start suppressing the Anglican Church. And we're getting some railways built, which are going to add more bureaucrats. And then I think we have a spate of arts academies to be built after that. And actually, we've only managed to bring in census suffrage quite recently. However, I believe we're now in a position where we could push towards universal suffrage. We will have the support of the trade unions, and we will no longer see the radicalization of the industrialists. So to bolster the support of the intelligentsia and the petty bourgeoisie and the trade unions, who Fergus O'Connor would have supported, and of course this is what Fergus would have wanted more than anything, is universal suffrage. We had a 51% chance of success, and at the first attempt, universal suffrage has passed through drafting and is now going to voting. And on its first attempt, we've gotten human rights. That unlocks multiculturalism, which was something we were going to push towards. And we have a couple of welfare laws as well. We now have universal suffrage. Plus 20 political strength per vote, 25 legitimacy based on government clout, 110 legitimacy based on votes. The government size allowance has increased. The women's suffrage law has been added. Fergus O'Connor said nothing about extending votes to women. The Irish Parliamentary Party movement, which would have grown out of the repeal movement, was at times violently against giving the vote to women in the early 1900s. And what would often happen is that women would be basically abused at Irish Parliamentary Party meetings that they attended if they called for the right to vote, and they would be barred from entering theatres in Dublin where the Irish Parliamentary Party was giving speeches. So male suffragettes, such as Francis Sheehy Skeffington, would be probably the most well-known. He would actually sometimes go to these meetings and he would stand up and he would protest that women deserve the right to vote and that the Irish Parliamentary Party should support women's rights to vote, and he would get beaten up. And of course he was summarily executed by British forces during the 1916 Rising, basically just an insane, well, he was found to be insane at the time that he executed 4 people. Bowen Colthorst, a British officer, screaming passages from the Bible, had 4 men executed. And I just had to check there because I remember the quote, or I remember the context of the quote, but I couldn't remember who said it, who in the upper echelons of the Irish Parliamentary Party said it. It was John Dillon who told that women's suffrage represented the ruin of Western civilization. It would bring about the ruin of Western civilization if women were allowed to vote. And so with another change to the electoral acts in Britain, this will hopefully give us the power to begin pushing towards a presidential republic. 63% chance of success, but we will see the radicalization of the landed gentry and the Anglican Church. And the Anglican Church has lost, I think, about 2% in terms of power. We will begin the process of trying to pass it. And we will see just how much radicalism we get. The attempts to push through a presidential republic are threatening to rip Britain apart. We have a threat of revolution, and it is at critical levels. We will see the Midlands, we will see the West Country and Wales secede. So they will take 25 ships with them, and 35 troops. I think with what we have in Ireland and Scotland, we should actually be in a position to block that, to fight that. So I think we might very well allow the landed gentry and the church. It makes sense that the church would rebel against this. I think we will allow this to go through. Dissidents in Singapore have announced plans for a major march around government offices in the near future. While they profess peaceful intentions and claim everyone will be unarmed, the march itself will obviously serve as a rallying point for those unhappy with the government. Stop the march by any means necessary, or let it go ahead. It's a 50-50 chance that the civil war will increase or decrease. Let the procession go ahead. And we were lucky, it's actually dropped. So it would be handy to see how long we can keep this going, because somebody is also building barracks in the regions that are remaining loyal, just to be on the safe side. So we did not succeed in getting through the referral stage, just as the presidential republic law looked ready to topple. John Frost, is he still around? Rally their faction, whatever their faction is. You don't have much of a faction to rally with the trade union. So 5% interest group pop attraction for the trade unions, or the petty bourgeoisie would get some. Do you know what? Yeah. Because I would like to see the trade union become a bit stronger. We will welcome their support. That would be, because I think it's going to be President Fergus O'Connor if we can get this through, and Fergus would support the trade unions. And we can see a bit of hovering about in the numbers here. Went from 116 down to 114, but it does look like, unless something big happens here, it does look like we're going to see a civil war break through shortly. Victoria of Hanover mistook an enemy in the armed forces after accusing them with false charges. Moderates in the armed forces defected to the landed gentry's cause. That's not great, because strangely enough, the armed forces are pretty much supportive of this at the moment. Then again, the majority of the commanders are members of the intelligentsia and the petty bourgeoisie. Their bedfellows may not be so accommodating. Or Victoria of Hanover should step down. Minus 10% interest group pop attraction. That's actually for the industrialists. And minus 25% popularity. She really should step down. And I think at this stage there is nothing, if I am correct, to stop a revolution. So there are 40, by the looks of it, aligned against us, and a couple of ships have started to turn as well. Wales has stopped. Wales has pulled itself out of the revolution somehow. And there we go. We have a British capitalist revolt against us. A ton of factions have... Oh, there's a ton of stuff going on. So now that we have gone to war, we have renamed ourselves the Whig Party. And the Democratic Progressive Party. It's always worrying when men with guns put Democratic in their title. And then we have a lot of marginalized, the poor old trade union. What interesting bedfellows the trade unionists now have. The Anglican Church, the landed gentry, and the industrialists. And of course we are the Whig Party standing in defence of Her Majesty's government so that we can replace it with a presidential republic. Who is actually leading the revolution? The capitalist revolt is under the command of Edmund Bridges. We have a stronger navy and we have a stronger army. However, at the moment, Austria is considering supporting the revolution, which could be problematic, to keep the monarchy in power. Portugal, with its 14 battalions, is considering supporting us, or is willing to support us. It's part of our customs union, and the East India Company, so it'll be interesting to see what they want in the diplomatic phase. So for an obligation, the East India Company will potentially be swayed towards our cause. The British capitalist revolt has started an import route for dye from the British market. Well, thanks. At the moment, the East India Company has declared that it is siding with us, so we have 300 troops. The British capitalist revolt has now started embargoing us. Okay. So it'll be interesting to see. It will be interesting to see if Austria and or Prussia join with the revolt. Austria has declared neutrality. So Lewis McTavish and Seaton, the two great generals representing the intelligentsia and the petty bourgeoisie. And there is Binning representing the armed forces. We might leave Binning alone for the moment. He has 2 troops, so he's fine. War has broken out. To arms. So things are going mixed at the moment. I think we're doing well up in this direction, up around the lowlands, and I think we've had a loss down here potentially. I think they're able to bring more forces to bear. I'm still not totally to grips with the actual, the way that military combat is conducted, and of course the thing is that when you're fighting as the British, basically, you just have so many troops that you don't really even need to worry. Edmund Bridges himself, the commander, the leader of the capitalist revolt, is inflicting fairly heavy losses onto the East India Company troops. The East India Company has been doing mighty work in actually holding off before we got our troops mobilized. The North Sea Forces, I think it would make sense for us to devote them to this front. So that is the Scottish and Irish forces, and McTavish will... that should have been advance the front. And McTavish will advance or contribute to this rather large front down here. We are, if I am correct, beginning to see British forces seizing a good chunk of the region over here, or liberating it, I should say. And I think we're pushing down from the north. We're in a couple of engagements here at the moment, and actually their commanders are holding up pretty well against poor old Seaton. He's actually not doing great. But we are hammering them on the war support side of things. I don't think we're doing a great job. Well, we're actually doing better down here than we are in Scotland. We're pushing in towards the revolt itself, I believe. We have some forces that are basically just running around with nobody doing anything. We've just seen the liberation of a large chunk of areas. However, this is not looking good. 952 men against 33,000. That's not great. That's not a great number. We're seeing a better job up here, I would hope. Duncan Annandale is being pushed back by General Seaton, taking his orders directly from William Smith O'Brien. We're seeing a pretty hefty collapse in war support for the capitalist revolt. We are finding it difficult to actually push through in many areas. We're seeing the formation of the Patriotic Party. Now is the time to be patriotic, and it is indeed the armed forces who have become the Patriot Party. And even in the midst of a civil war, party-affiliated newspapers have been proliferating during the election season. Really, it's an election season, is it? The Whig Party has used the papers brilliantly. So there's Fergus O'Connor and his usage of the newspapers. Again, there is indeed an election in 170 days. It does appear as though we are doing fairly well on the Lancashire front. We have had a defeat to the revolt. We're not putting in as great an effort. We just liberated a ton of areas. We're not putting in as great an achievement down here. We did have a draw. So, poor Owl. Where's he gone to? Lewis McTavish, he's not doing a mighty job. He's not doing a mighty job, and I might indeed actually move him to defending the front. He's engaged at the moment, so I might actually move them to defending the front and holding the front. The revolt is not necessarily able to proceed, and it is about to fall to negative score shortly. John Frost of the trade unionist movement has released a positive endorsement of the Whig Party for its stalwart support of voting rights in Great Britain in the midst of a civil war. The Whig Party is the guardian of British franchise, or 20 momentum to the Whig Party and 10 group pop attraction to the petty bourgeoisie. Do you know what? I think we're going to go for that, because the petty bourgeoisie general is actually performing better at the moment. So I think that's going to represent the people being more impressed with his performance. And I'm just waiting for these battles to come to an end, neither of which is going very well at the moment. And I'm actually going to put them both on defensive orders. And actually, since we switched to defensive orders, things have gotten dramatically worse for the revolt. So I imagine what we did was we just threw a ton of Irish into the battle. And especially up here in the Lancashire front, the North Sea Army, we just threw a ton of Irish into the battle. And they've soaked up all the bullets. So the revolt is actually performing a bit better in terms of its military successes, but it's not really able to turn them into success. So a rather lengthy battle down here in the south, in the Battle of Oxford. And we have seen something has happened. The following war goals were enforced on the British capitalist revolt. Basically, we just managed to hold out long enough and have them lose all of their forces and whittle them down, whittle them down, whittle them down. The following war goals were enforced on the British capitalist revolt. So we managed to hold the northern line fairly well. We didn't perform great down here. We did lose a couple of engagements. We cleared up all the areas that they had taken early on. They took all of Wales at one stage, and I think down around Cornwall. We managed to mop those up, but we're not progressing very well as we tried to push north past Birmingham. But we have reincorporated the revolt, and I think we have absolutely shattered everyone. We have 3 marginalized groups: the Anglican Church, the gentry. So we'll stop suppressing them because there's absolutely no need at the moment. The trade unions are almost out of being marginalized. So we might actually, for the hell of it, bolster them a bit. But we have the Patriotic Party, which is now made up of the armed forces and the industrialists, and the Whig Party, the intelligentsia, 43% clout. And surely we will be able to bring through Fergus O'Connor's dream of dismantling the monarchy. The worst thing is we have 24 months to get the presidential republic through, or the petty bourgeoisie will not be happy, and it's still in the referral phase because it's been stuck there with the Civil War. We're just a few days out from a new election which should be absolutely devastating. 61% to the Whig Party, the Patriotic Party, on 20%, and the Agricultural Party got a substantial vote. There's nobody else to vote for. That's the major issue. The trade unions have been knocked down again. They were at 4%. I don't know what's after happening to them. But yeah, look at this legitimate government. I didn't even know the numbers could go that high. 96% chance to make it through referral, and it's on to drafting. What are the actual chances of things stopping? 3.5% chance of an advance, or 96.4% chance of success. And we have modernizing the arsenal. We've been getting some pop-ups about rifling. The change in the large-scale production from smoothbore muskets to rifles in the arms industry in Lancashire has ushered in a new era for small arms production. This is something we would want to look into. The performance of the army wasn't tremendously great. That's mostly down to me. So 20% arms industry throughput and some migration. Sure, the Manchester Arsenal shall be famed throughout the world. It is 1852. This is the first year in which Fergus O'Connor would not have been available. So if he had not appeared before the 1st of the 1st, then we would not have been able to get him. And we have a 100% chance of enacting a presidential republic, but the rate at which it's increasing is so slow, and we now have a 96% chance of another civil war. The rural folk are indeed backing the landed gentry and the Anglican Church. Who do we have supporting this? Wales, the Midlands, and the West Country. So we're going to fire off another revolutionary change. The infernal machine. An attempt on the life of the Queen has killed many, but spared our ruler. So, the rural folk, the church, and the landed gentry, they want to preserve the monarchy, so they have attempted to assassinate the monarch. Limit Victoria's public appearances. The crime is obviously the fault of John Mill. Now, who is John Mill a part of? The intelligentsia. No, we're not going to blame it. We're not going to blame the intelligentsia for trying to kill Victoria of Hanover. She can stay in her room for a while. It's March 20th. March being Irish American Heritage Month. We're a month short of the anniversary of the 1916 Rising, the negative, the backwards anniversary of the 1916 Rising, or even, we'll say, the anniversary of the Battle of Clontarf. But we will manage to push through a presidential republic. And we now have a presidential republic. And I got myself an achievement. And so, after a war with the landlords, who have destroyed and exploited Ireland, Fergus O'Connor now reigns as president of Hungary. Hungary? Oh, the British Republic. He is a ruler and politician reigning over the Whig Party, sometimes the Chartist Party. 100 legitimacy, righteous government. Culture, Irish. Religion, Catholic. That is wrong. Fergus O'Connor was a Protestant, as was William Smith O'Brien. But in the character templates, it explicitly says that Smith O'Brien, religion, Protestant. It does not say that for O'Connor. So by the looks of it, if a character is Irish, by default, they are Catholic, if they have no explicit religion assigned to them. And finally, what does the future hold now that the Irish have taken control of Britain? Now that we have a two-man triumvirate in power? We could split out an independent Irish republic. We could release Ireland, and it would have the same style of government as the British Republic, same with Scotland and Wales. But we don't need to. The lunatics have taken control of the asylum. I think it's more fair to say that the prisoners have taken control of the prison. And possibly, if I was to play on, we might be able to try and get rid of the laws discriminating against Ireland, and bring through some generals and some admirals and some more Irish leaders who might be able to continue leading the British Republic and using its funding and its financing to support Ireland. If you were Fergus O'Connor, in 1853, the newly appointed President of the British Republic, what would you do? What changes would you make? Who would you go to war with? Thank you for joining me on this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so for more content. I have a couple of other ideas for playthroughs in Vicky 3, and I tend to take a look, or I plan to take a look at who could be added to the game as historical Irish agitators, who could be added alongside William Smith O'Brien, so do subscribe to be kept up to date when that comes out. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope to see you again when I need more cannon fodder for a rebellion against the British.